Hi, it's Mr. Andersen, and this is AP Environmental Sciences, video 32. It's in the health impacts of pollution. Way back in the 1930s, the Chiso Chemical Corporation built a factory in Minamata, which is way southwest Japan. It was located between the Minamata River and the Minamata Bay, and they were producing chemicals like acetaldehyde, which is not inherently dangerous. It's used as a precursor to make things like vinegar, but they were using an enzyme that contained mercury. And as they pumped the pollution back into the bay, that methyl mercury got into the food supply, and it moved its way up the food chain to the point where people were eating fish that contained mercury in it. They started to develop a disease called the Minamata disease. They didn't know what really caused it, and then they eventually traced it back to this factory. Over 2,000 people developed Minamata disease over that time. And so anything that negatively impacts human health is a disease. It could be a chronic disease. It takes a long time to develop, or it could be acute. It develops very quickly. It can be caused by many different things. Disease could be caused by pathogens like viruses and bacteria. An example could be the Ebola outbreak in Western Africa. That would be an acute disease. It comes on very quickly and it's caused by an Ebola virus. Human health diseases can also be caused by our risks. Smoking, for example, leads to lung cancer, but it can also be impacted by pollution. In other words, chemicals that get into the environment become toxins and then they affect us in a negative way. We classify these in 5 different groups. There are the neurotoxins, which attack the brain and the nervous system. We have carcinogens, which lead to cancer. We have teratogens, which affect the embryo. We have then endocrine disruptors, which impact the endocrine system and the hormones in our body. And then finally, we have allergens, which don't affect everyone. Now, we use chemicals in our body, so lots of times we have to figure out what's the safe dose of a chemical. And so we use a test called the LD50, and I'll walk you through that. The problem with a lot of these chemicals is they bioaccumulate. They're picked up by living systems, and then as they move up the food chain, they biomagnify. And so we ban a lot of chemicals. The Stockholm Convention was a convention to ban 12, they called them the dirty dozen, 12 endocrine disruptors, and I think they've added another 9 since then. And so disease can be caused by pathogens, but they can be acute. They come on very, very quickly, like this outbreak of Ebola recently, but most of the diseases that impact humans, so this is a list of the largest diseases in humanity, are going to come on very slowly. They're going to be chronic diseases of the upper respiratory tract. You see, we have heart disease, stroke, things like that are killing most of the people on our planet. Health risks are changing over time. So it used to be that the traditional risks were things like undernutrition, bad air pollution inside, poor sanitation. But you can see over time we're shifting towards more modern risks. Smoking, for example, obesity, inactivity, urban air quality. These are becoming the risks of the modern world. And a lot of those risks are ones that we take on our own. So if we're looking at lung cancer deaths, for example, most of those are formed from smoking, not caused by air pollution. But this video is mostly about pollution. It's about toxicology. It's about the harmful chemicals that can affect humans. And we break those into 5 categories. The neurotoxins, so the methyl mercury in Minamata disease would be an example of that. Lead is a great example of a neurotoxin. So it's actually damaging parts of the brain, especially the highlighted portions here in the prefrontal cortex. So as this person right here is recycling batteries, that lead, they're being exposed to lead, and that is going to be a neurotoxin. We also have carcinogens. These are chemicals that can lead to cancer. A famous one would be asbestos, which was used way back in the 50s as an insulator, but now causes diseases like lung cancer and mesothelioma, which is a rare form of cancer caused by asbestos. We also have teratogens. These are going to be chemicals that affect us before we're born. And so a famous example is thalidomide. It was given to women, and what it does is it decreases morning sickness, but what you got were these awful birth defects since it's a teratogen. Another example of that could be alcohol. Causes fetal alcohol syndrome. We have endocrine disruptors, and so the way that our cells communicate is through hormones. So they'll dock with a receptor on our cell, and then there's a message that's sent into the cell. The way that endocrine disruptors work is they either block that receptor so the hormone can't dock, or they can imitate the hormone itself. That's what DDT does. And the Stockholm Convention was a number of different countries that got together to ban the use of these dirty dozen, these 12 endocrine disruptors. And then finally we have allergens. These are going to be chemicals that affect each of us in a different way. And so this person is taking an allergy test where they're exposed to all these different chemicals and they're seeing where the response is. And this can be deadly. If you think about a peanut allergy, can lead to anaphylaxis. And so you have to kind of know what chemicals you are susceptible to. Now, almost all chemicals on the planet can be a toxin if we get them in large enough amounts. And so what's the safe amount of coffee, for example, that I can drink? Well, we use a test called the lethal dose, or the LD50 test. And a lot of this, unfortunately, is done on animals. What you do is you take a new chemical and you apply larger doses to a set of mice, for example. So the first group is giving very low amounts, low dosage, and then those at the end are giving a high dosage. And what you're looking at is mortality rate. So those that got a low dose, the percent that died is almost nil. But those who got a high dose, 100% mortality. So to calculate the LD50, what you do is you look for the point at which that graph crosses 50% mortality. And so we could say it's at 3.8 milligrams per kilogram. You then divide that by 10, and that's going to be your LD50 for mice. And so it would be 0.38 milligrams per kilogram. That's going to be the safe dose. If we see where that is on the graph, it's going to be way down here. Now the LD50 then, to extrapolate that for humans, what we'll do is we divide it by 10 again, because there may be different susceptibility in humans and mice. And then we'll divide it by 10 again, just to be safe. And so the LD50 in humans would be 0.0038 milligrams per kilogram. Now, the problem with a lot of these chemicals is they bioaccumulate. So that methyl mercury that was pumped into Minamata Bay was picked up by phytoplankton. In other words, as they were taking in water, they're taking some of those chemicals. They don't kill those phytoplankton, but those phytoplankton are eaten by zooplankton, which are eaten by small fish. And as we move up the food chain, the chemicals don't go away. They bioaccumulate. And so over time, they get to larger and larger doses. And so the EPA put a list out of what fish are safe to eat in an area where methyl mercury may be found. And so they said that at the lower parts of the food chain, krill and maybe oysters, for example, it's safe to eat an unlimited amount of these. But as we move up to tuna and sharks, you should minimize the amount that you're eating because there are going to be larger loads of mercury. So did you learn the following? Could you pause the video at this point and fill in the blanks? Let me do that for you. Human health can be impacted by diseases which are chronic, it takes a long time, or acute, can be caused by pathogens like viruses, for example, Ebola virus, or risks like smoking. But pollution is chemicals that are toxic to us. We break those into 5 categories: neurotoxins, carcinogens, teratogens, endocrine disruptors. Remember, we used the Stockholm Convention as a treaty to try to stop using the dirty dozen of these endocrine disruptors. We have allergens, which affect each of us differently. The dose response we use is the LD50 test, and then the thing that we have to be wary of in environments is bioaccumulation, biomagnification. That's health impacts of pollution, and I hope that was helpful.